Today on Mercedes Garage, Mercedes inline 6-cylinder diesel engines, V6 diesel engines, and V8 diesel engines on Mercedes Garage. I did it again. We have a slight gap of, this time, 1.5 minutes before the next feature. So I'll just tell you, this is the last in the series of videos about the diesel engine. We covered the inline 4, inline 5, inline 6, and this video is about the V6 and V8 and also inline 6. So sit back and enjoy the video. Hopefully that was a minute.
Oh, I think.
You think that was a minute? I don't know.
I don't think it was more.
Hi and welcome back to another episode of Mercedes Garage. Today we're going to be talking about the inline 6-cylinder V6 and V8 diesel engines from Mercedes. First, the inline 6, which, excuse me while I need to look at my computer screen to show this. Okay, the first one is the OM603 engine. Now, this engine was both on the 124, W126, and the W140 models. It was in the US, it was from 1986 to 1996. But there was a little bit of a problem. So hopefully I could pause this. The problem was this engine has a bit of a bad history and reputation. This was the engine that Mercedes used from 1986 to 1987. As I said before, it went for 86 to 97, 9 years. So, but the initial problem was that they had a problem with the engine, and the problem was that they started to put more emission controls on them. That was not just for the state of California, but for all other states, most states at that time. I'm trying to read. The problem was an in-part particulate filter or trap oxidizer for the US market. And what happened was that caused the cylinder head to heat up too much, causing it to crack, and also the turbocharger to then crack as well. So Mercedes then issued a recall campaign, which I don't know if it was an official recall, but it was to fix that, to remove that oxygen trap, the particulate matter trap, to get rid of that, to help alleviate that problem. Also, they replaced the turbochargers if they needed to. So this engine has somewhat of a bad reputation because of that. But once that problem was fixed, the engine seems to be okay. We'll resume this video here. Because it could also cause the head gas, cracked cylinder heads. It was a bit of a problem. So Just let this catch up now because I stopped that. So what happened then was a new model came out, new engine. There's a couple different versions of this engine. As you can see with the picture showing right now, it's a 3 liter. Kept going. Like I said, it was in the 124 300D. This engine was in the W124 300D turbo, W124 300TD station wagon, which that picture is not correct. W126 300 SDL, W126 350 SDL, and SD. Only difference between the SD and the SDL is one's longer and one's shorter. Small wheelbase, long wheelbase. Okay, so now the next engine is the OM606. This one was a pretty good engine. It went from 1993 to 2001. Again, it's probably most likely it's a turbocharged. This engine was good. It didn't have the problems as the previous one did. It did have a MAP sensor, mass airflow sensor. I don't think that would cause much problems. They both came naturally aspirated and turbocharged. Remember, I was trying to figure that out. Some were turbocharged. It was on the W210 and the W124, both E300Ds. The W140 300 SD, but then was called the S300, and the Grottenwagen G300 turbo diesel. And that was basically from 1993 to 2000. Now, the engine was produced until 2001, so obviously they were still using it in something else. So we'll now go to the next vehicle, the next engine I meant, OM613, which this was basically a revised version. It shares the same components as the 4-cylinder and the 5-cylinder engine, 611 and 612. And this was used both on the W210 E320 CDI and W220 S320 CDI. The E-Class, the W210, was available in the US. The S-Class diesel W220 was not available in the US. So, just let this, where are we here? Excuse me, this is on a different, I think we skipped one. Bear with me, sorry about that. Sorry for a slight interruption. That was, the next one is the OM648. Looks better this way. That was from 2002 to 2006. Now you have a slight difference. We're increasing the pressure of the injectors. Now the injection pressure is up to 23,000. That's right, 23,000 psi per injector. So since it's the inline 6, so 6 cylinders at 23,000 psi per cylinder with ejection pressure. So that's that's a lot of fuel pressure. Let's see what else. I wish I could get that bigger. the oil change is now 13,000 miles because this is about the time when Mercedes was switching over to using full synthetic oil, so that made it different, which we'll have a video coming up on that on the Mercedes FSS system, flexible service system, which came about the same time. It's kind of important. We won't go too long into that. This was from 2002 to 2006 this was made. The flexible service system came out in 1997, but that was on gasoline engines too, and as well as this. So that's basic, and it was in the, which models was this in? The E320, probably that should be it's W211. W211 and the W220 S-Class, which was not that diesel version. The S320 CDI was never sold in the US. Maybe in Canada, but it was never sold in the US. Now we'll go to the next engine. Bear with me. Still point doesn't. Let's go to the next engine. So as you're seeing that we're now getting fewer engines. Now here's the latest one, is an OM 656 engine. This is still in production. It was from 2017 to now. It's still being made. As you can see, it's entirely sealed. You can't even see the V-belts on this engine, or the serpentine belt. It wouldn't have a V-belt. It's a serpentine. But you can't even see it. Only thing you have now we're having a new product called AdBlue. AdBlue started about 2005-ish. Anyway, in the US, probably in Europe as well. I'm not 100% sure about that, but it probably was about the same time. It's called a DEF filter, which, what does DEF stand for? I'll put it down in this. Oh, diesel exhaust fluid, DEF, which it's basically, it's a urea, numerous different names. They were called Blue Tech, then AdBlue, all came, and it was all referring to the diesel fluid additive, better known as DEF fluid, diesel exhaust fluid. So, which is basically made with urine of some, it says urea, so it's some kind of uric acid, urine acid, that eliminates the emissions for the diesel, or helps reduce the emissions. Okay, so now this was in 2017 to the present, so this is still being made. It's a turbocharged. It's currently in the W222 S-Class, which the W22 S-Class is sold here, but that engine is not. It was in the like I said, the 222. It's in the CLS 350D, which is not sold here. The W213, which is sold here but not as a diesel. The GLE, which is sold here, which is not as a diesel. The GLS X167, which is sold here but not as a diesel. As you can see, what's happening is the US doesn't have diesels really too much in a new car. CLS W400D, W463, the G class, the W167, and the new E class, the new S class, W223, 400D, is also with that same engine. Now we're going to talk about something completely different. The that was inline 6-cylinder diesel engines, and before was the inline 4 and the inline 5. Mercedes then came up with a V6 diesel engine, which that's what we'll have next. Let me get this to the next engine. So I'll just move this along, which there's only one, the OM642, which came out in 2005 to the present. It is still in production. It says present, so it should still be in production. So hit C, the particulars on that engine. So if this gets to the next, as you can see, this is, I think this picture that is shown here is without the cover, or they call the engine beauty cover, which is a piece of plastic, which they now put on engines for the last 20 plus years. This was used in many different cars, which is still in production now. It's used in Dodges and Mercedes Sprinters. It's used in all the same cars as before we talked about, and all of these that you're going to see here on your screen are not available, or weren't. Some were available in the US up until a certain point. The C-Class diesel, I don't remember that one. The E-Class diesel was here in the US. The CLK was never in a diesel in the US. The W212, the W2, which one is that? The GOK, the R class was a diesel in the US. I do remember that one. But this was years ago, 2007 to 2002, 2007 to 2011. An ML 300D. The Gutenwagen in diesel. A GL diesel, that was here. That was in the US. They did have that one. The newer one was not. It may have been, when I say was not, it may have been for a year or so, and then it was discontinued for the US, but in Europe or in other countries it's still in. And this Vano van was never sold here, and just like it says on this bottom, Chrysler 300C was never sold. The 300C was sold here, but not as a diesel, and that was a Chrysler product. But remember, Mercedes had owned Chrysler at one time, so there was some. And here's a photo of the engine. Okay, so that's basically the end of the V6 diesel engine. Now is the V8 diesel engine. The OM 628 engine. And this is the pinnacle of diesel engines for Mercedes. 247 horsepower in one version, or 256 horsepower in another version of that same engine, and that was in production from 1999 to 2005. It doesn't say if it's turbo. It should be turbo. It's a CDI, common direct, yeah, it's a turbocharged. So you basically have the ultimate engine. A V8 diesel engine with 256 horsepower. What more can you want? Yes, you do have to put up with the diff diesel exhaust fluid and AdBlue and all that nonsense, which some people will say some of these emission controls did ruin the diesel engine for performance wise. And it was available on the W220, the W163, and the W468. I don't think that ML400 CDI was ever sold in the US. W211 and the W220. Those models were sold here, but again, like I said, some were diesel, some were not diesel, some engines weren't sold here, some engines were sold here. And then the final one, OM629, V8 diesel engine. This was in production from 2005 to 2013. It's the world's first aluminum V8 diesel engine. And this produced between 302 horsepower to let me see, it's a turbocharge, which it has a little interesting feature of the turbocharge, variable geometry turbocharge, which means the fins, there's a series of fins in the turbocharger that they varied by moving back and forth for better performance and more horsepower. So that's what a variable geometry turbocharger is, as you can read that on the screen too. It also said, let's see what the horsepower is. It's between 302, 310, and 315 horsepower. And that was on the GL, the W164, X164, GL450, GL420, ML450 CDI, and that's not the right car they showed the picture of. A W211, E320 CDI, an S420 CDI, W221, and a W221 450 CDI. The W221 was sold in the US when it was available, but not, again, as a diesel. So that's basically it for the Mercedes diesel engines. Next time we will explore the gasoline engines, starting at 4 cylinders, and I think there may be a 3-cylinder in there. I'll have to look. And we'll talk about, hopefully they'll have some of the older models in there, because they're somewhat interesting, because there was a model called the Simplex, which just meant it was simple to use. And that was in the early 1900s, like 1901, 1903. And what Mercedes did at that time, up until about the 1930s, was made an engine such as, it would be the Mercedes whatever 10/25/50, meaning you had 10, 25, or 50 horsepower, because at that time there was a law in Germany that was a tax law that higher the horsepower of the car, higher the tax. So Mercedes circumvented that higher tax by making the 10/20/30 horsepower cars to get around that tax. That's what we'll talk about in the next episode of Mercedes Garage, talking about gasoline engines, because there's a few of those, and they did that by varying the engine horsepower. So thank you for for watching. Thank you for the 29 subscribers. Thank you very much for subscribing. And also, if you like the video, hit the thumbs up button and keep on motoring in your Mercedes-Benz and enjoy your diesel engines. Thank you and goodbye.